Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. For those of you I have not met, I'm Megan THATFORD. I'm the CEO of Elite Meet. And we are very, very lucky to have Accrete.AI and Accrete.AI Government with us tonight, presenting and talking a little bit about their organization, the career field, and also some of the opportunities that may exist within their organization. So Bill Wall is with us of Accrete.AI Government, and he's going to be moderating the Q&A session that's going to include Zach Marshall, who is now the VP of Marketing and Sales, correct, Zach? Did I get that correct? I know you just changed roles, so I want to make sure I said it correctly.
Yeah, so really it's VP of Sales and Marketing, and I keep them in that order because eventually probably marketing will get passed off to another leader, but for now, it's both.
Good. Well, congratulations. And Andrea Stana, you are here with us, and you are in product development, correct?
Yeah, the head of product over at Accrete, correct.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. For those of you who are here as part of the membership and do not know, Zach Marshall is an Elite Meet member and has found employment with Accrete. He actually has a great story, and he probably could share that with us in a little bit about how he came to know the organization through an event and then was offered a position there months later. So it shows the power of the network and also maintaining connections that you've met in the professional network.
Yeah, hey everybody, Zach Marshall. So let's see, I was in the Navy from 2009 until 2019. I cut out a little bit early, 6 months early, using the Skill Bridge program to join a startup in San Francisco. Along that transition, there's a lot of forged paperwork as well. So the TAPS program, I think I was in there for about an hour. I joke about forged paperwork, but I definitely did what I had to do to move paperwork along, to include a Commodore signing a memo that said I could take no-cost orders to San Francisco because there was the Skill Bridge program was just going to take too long the normal way. Along the way, I met Bill at a Elite Meet event, and also Joe Mashinsky and Mike Riley. I think they have been on and off this call so far, and they've become great friends and mentors of mine, and that network has really exploded, not just at Accrete, but also beforehand and outside of Accrete. So networking is huge. It's how I got every role that I've had, except for the middle one, which was with another CEO. So the quick background there is that I went to Carbon Robotics first out of the military, which was a 24-person startup with about $5.5 million raised. I was the first non-technical hire on the team, and within 8 months we closed the doors. And boy, was it a crazy 8 months. You know, the things that I had were mostly wins, but the company, of course, lost. We sold 1,000 robots to one of the largest toy manufacturers in the world, and I went on kind of a circuit, going to different conferences and so on, and started building relationships that way, and built a really strong relationship inside Danaher, which is a public company, and a bunch of their opcos. And so that's kind of where I stepped my first foot into sales, but it also just gave me the confidence to start playing with the enterprise and global companies. So anyways, we closed that down. We replaced the CEOs. That's a whole nother Elite Meet fireside chat, just debrief Carbon Robotics. But I stayed on with the replacement CEO to be a founding employee of another company called Rapid Robotics, where we went for the same problem and solution in the market, but in a different way. Instead of building the hardware, we just did the software. And within 8 weeks, I'd sold our solutions into 2 manufacturers in like the San Jose area. We'd booked about 2x what we could do in the next year, and we raised $4.5 million. So that was a pretty solid win. And I went to the CEO, and this is a lesson learned for me, but it ended up being a really great thing. I went to him, I was like, all right, brother, now what do you want me to do? What am I supposed to do for the next 9 months? Because that founder had already sold the company for $100 million, didn't need a business ops guy for a 5-person team. I was paid a lot at the time, taking my salary from the previous company. And so, we worked on that for about a month, and then he was gracious enough to let me leave with a few months of severance, and he vested a bunch of my stock right that day. So I left with enough to go do something else, went and started a nonprofit that helps technology companies open offices in Rochester, New York. and kind of went out on the circuit, which is I started working with Joe Mashinsky, who again I met with Bill Wall at that Elite Meet event, and with Mike Riley, and working with them with some of the fundraising efforts for Accrete, built some credibility there. And so when it was time, Bill Wall gave me a call and said, "Hey, I think this team needs somebody who's ready to try to close some deals and can be a little bit more process driven on that." So that's why I joined the team.
Background has always sort of been at the intersection of markets, technology, and entrepreneurship. So I started my career in on Wall Street as a prop trader. So I did that for, gosh, it was 13 some odd years, and started off as a discretionary trader, you know, behind the screen, looking at prices all day, and evolved that into the quantitative side of the business. So I didn't necessarily study computer science at school, but I did take some courses, and I was able to utilize that skill set to translate what I was learning as a discretionary trader into ultimately high frequency trading type systems, and that, you know, did very well for me in the mid 2000s. And towards the second half of my career as a trader, I actually ended up founding a broker dealer here on the West Coast. Originally, I was in New York. And that's when I started exploring the AI landscape a lot more seriously, and actually ended up meeting circa 2010 Prashant, who's the CEO of Accrete, and we began working together with various quantitative trading systems as far back as back then. So that, you know, world sort of changed pretty dramatically after the 2008 crisis. You know, volatility really dried up, and for active traders, it became a difficult space to operate in. And so it led me to focus more on the tech and entrepreneurship side of my passions, which took me into the venture space. And that was the time when equity crowdfunding was sort of coming into the limelight, as certain legislative changes enabled everyday investors to participate in early stage startups, which had never really been the case before. So I joined one of the leading platforms there, working on the sales side, either initially looking for investors, but ultimately finding companies that I could help perform due diligence on and bring to the platform to offer up to investors. And during that time, Prashant and I always kept in touch, which those early efforts that he was pursuing after he also kind of left the markets ultimately became the technology that would take shape and form into Accrete. And so over time, the mixture of the technology and the startup expertise sort of melded together with Prashant and other team members that he's been working with for a very long time, and the company sort of took shape. So that's both my background and how it all led to Accrete, where I now, as I mentioned earlier, work as the head of product, really helping to communicate what the product vision is for the company and strategy going forward. From that perspective, I work with various stakeholders, everything from industry analysts to the customers, the developers, the designers, the data scientists, and understand how we can leverage all of these various needs that are out there and the capabilities that we have to provide solutions for a whole litany of different industries, from finance, which is my background and many of the team's background, but we've moved on to entertainment companies, government, real estate, and a whole bunch of other use cases. So happy to talk more about that as we go along.
And so like Megan said, I'm the CEO of Accrete.AI Government. That's our government-focused subsidiary of Accrete.AI. So my job is to market and sell Accrete.AI products to the U.S. federal government. I've been in the technology world for about 12 years, selling hardware, software services, mostly in the DC area. I spent a couple of years in Argentina doing digital transformation and product insertion into the gold mining industry, of all things. And then prior to that, I was a career Army Special Forces officer. 22 years in, I got out in 2008. I spent my last 6 years in the Joint Special Operations Command, or some of its subordinate organizations. And then prior to that, I spent most of my career in Latin America. So I'm very excited to talk to you guys and help you guys, because when I got out in 2008, there was no such thing as Elite Meet. There was only, you know, the horrible TAP program, which I actually only went to the first hour of, and then I walked out, forged my paperwork, and never went back. So I'm really interested in hearing what you guys are interested in, talking to you guys, helping you through the process, and, you know, just being part of your network. So very happy to be here. Thanks, Megan.
Do you have anything else you want to start with first, Bill, or do we want to dive right into the question and interview part?
So I think, Megan, you've already sent out kind of resumes of all of us. So if along the way you guys want to ask detailed questions, just pipe up. I thought we would do a very casual kind of fireside chat type of event tonight. I'm going to talk to Andres first about kind of his background and his point of view. And then I'll talk to Zach about his point of view. We did originally have Prashant Bhuyan, who's our CEO, lined up for this. Unfortunately, pressing events took him away. Sometimes that's the way things are in a startup. So we'll move on without him. The first thing I'll tell you is, before I start talking to Andres, I'll just give you a quick kind of thumbnail history of Accrete. So about 3.5 years ago, Accrete started as a artificial intelligence company in New York City focused on finance and Wall Street. And Prashant and Andres and some of his business partners had, for the previous maybe 10 years, been building different types of intellectual property and different kind of techniques, and brought into the team several guys who had deep background with IBM and the IBM Watson program, and decided to kind of build a different type of AI company that was focused on helping solve people's problems, really specifically solving a problem. Not like, let's just sell you a piece of software that we've made, but let's figure out what your problem is and then build some software to fix that. So they started out in the fintech world, building things to help traders and bankers and brokers, quant funds. And within the financial world, you'll hear people say, they want alpha. And alpha is the first mover advantage that allows you to make money that other people don't. It's the amount of, if everybody invests in GameStop today, you're not making any money, or GameStop today. But if you invested in it 4 days ago, you might have some alpha, right? You were a first mover, and so you got that advantage. So all of our technology is geared towards kind of decision making. And at first it started in the financial world. Then it moved into the entertainment world. And what's their first mover advantage? Well, their first mover advantage is, how do I find talent that's going to be viral before it becomes viral? And that's really hard for the recording music industry right now, because there's so many different ways to put music out. SoundCloud, YouTube, TikTok. I mean, every time you turn around, there's a new application. And previously, 20, 30 years ago, the recording music industry owns the means to make and the means to distribute music, but they no longer do. So now they're caught up in this world where they're just overwhelmed with choices. And how are they going to know who's going to be the next viral star? So we built some technology to help them with that, to go out and search on the internet, to look at songs and artists, to evaluate them, to assess them, and to kind of score what kind of their viralness was. I don't want to say virality. An influence they had. And so about 2.5 years ago, as Accrete was kind of growing their commercial business, they thought, hey, the government looks like good business. Let's go see what the government's doing. And request for proposal in government business, and they thought they would go after that. And come to find out that government business takes a little bit of experience, and it's kind of a different market and different animal. So that's government. So in the past year, maybe year and 5 months, we've had Accrete.AI Government running. We've won one government contract to build a proof of concept with a DoD organization. That contract now, it looks like in the next couple of months, it'll bloom into a long-term enterprise software deal. And from there, I think we're going to continue to grow both the commercial and the federal side of the business. So I'll stop there real quick for any questions, but that's kind of the brief kind of history and how we got to where we are now. Any questions on that?
Yeah, Bill, it's Chris on the government side. So what is it that, of course, the government's going to be interested in intelligence, but like what type? And then or is Accrete like writing a software program that it turns over to the government, like turns over intellectual property rights, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have built an application for them, and then we will license that application to them. We won't give them the IP. They will pay to use our software. And essentially what our software is doing is it is going out and using open source information and evaluating and assessing the amount of influence that a foreign government might have on specific corporate or financial entities. And I don't want to go much farther than that. I hope you guys will excuse me from going into depth, but that's about kind of the level I'd want to cover it right now. And I'm sure if you guys read the newspaper, you could figure out where that leads us to and what it is we're actually doing. But that's kind of the broad description of it. Does that help, Chris?
It does. So I can imagine like which agencies or organizations that you're working with. Are you doing anything with DoD?
Yes. So our contract is through the Defense Innovation Unit, and our end customer is in the Department of Defense.
Hey, Bill, this is Jason. One of your previous comments that you made about the mayhem with GameStop and what occurred using Reddit. I was curious about that, about how how an AI model will adapt to, a disruptive change like that, where you've got a bunch of individual actors coming together to have a, maybe previously unanticipated impact, on a data set or model. So how agile are you, at accounting for changes like that? And when you go into a subreddit and it becomes private, for instance, and you've got a group of actors that are trying to conceal their activities, how does a model react to that? How capable is it of using that data and determining if it's valid or not?
Jason, that's a great question. And GameStop, I was going to throw at Andres when I start talking to him and ask him to talk a little bit about kind of the implications of that. So let's hold that one. And Andres, know you, but once we start talking to Andres, we'll get the kind of the GameStop story, which I think is fascinating.
You bet. Thanks.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then let's just do a little fireside chat with Andres. So Andres, we talked a little bit about kind of your job responsibilities. We didn't talk that much about your education. And a lot of these guys are really interested in education. What kind of education do you need? What are the requirements? So let's kind of talk about your formal education and your informal education. Help us understand that a little bit.
Sure. So I went to business school, University of Pennsylvania, at the Wharton School. So I had a formal education on that side. And my areas of concentration were entrepreneurship, marketing, and information systems. So I was exposed to a certain extent on the computer science side of things. So I got a taste of coding. And, this was very early on when AI was not really a thing. I mean, I actually did become aware of it through that program in the form of just basic neural nets. And so that was my first exposure to that world. But it wasn't until I made it into Wall Street and trading that I really started to see a direct implementation that I could utilize and derive tremendous value from if I was able to do that. But the truth of the matter is that my AI models on my own, and all of the quantitative trading I did were actually hard-coded models. So I took my expertise as a trader and actually hard-coded them into programming languages, mostly C# at the time was sort of the de facto one, but really relied on external parties once I wanted to get into the heavier AI side of things. Now, why did I get attracted to that, and why did I continue to sort of self-educate, I guess, in that space? Well, markets fundamentally are not good places to try to utilize hard-coded systems for, because they're constantly dynamic, they're constantly adapting, which is now in many ways why what differentiates Accrete from so many other AI companies that build, as we call them, static models. that don't adapt to changing context, to changing ecosystems, which is just the reality of life. It's the reality of human behavior, and it's incredibly well reflected in markets. So I was always looking for not just AI, which can be a poor tool if you're utilizing it to generate systems that only work well in historical context but have no adaptability going forward. So I was really looking for dynamic AI. And really that is, if you want to distill down, what is it that separates Accrete from other AI companies? That's at our core. That's, in Prashant's DNA, it's in my DNA. We want to find the leading edge of AI research that can actually take data streams on an ongoing basis and continuously learn from them without losing accuracy. And that was always my search as it pertained to trading systems. And now we're taking those kind of learnings and philosophy from the market space and applying it to other real world use cases that mostly deal with unstructured data. So it's actually quite different from market data, which is typically structured in nature, and finding that there's actually tremendously higher alpha, as Bill was mentioning earlier, in non-financial use cases than there are in financial use cases. We actually find it a better space to operate in, despite the fact that we're actually using what we learned from the markets.
Yeah, it seems like Accrete that's the background is fintech. Like you came from there, Prashant came from there, Mike Riley was a trader who got put out of business by technology. It seems like AI has kind of started in the fintech world. Where do you see it going next? Where are the places that you see customer-wise or market-wise that are really interested in AI solving their problems?
It's going everywhere. I mean, that's the bottom line. This is going to be table stakes for every serious enterprise in the future. It already is in many ways today. So there's no industry, I think, that won't be touched by it to varying degrees. And, it's just a matter of their willingness to adopt it and the readiness to do so. What a lot of enterprises, I think, are focused on, and rightly so, is applying AI to their internal data. And that's something that we certainly do. And that's already what I think is, delineated as the big data problem, right? Big data is typically thought of as the data that resides inside of an organization. But if you think about the amount of data that sits outside of an organization, that's orders of magnitude larger. And that's, in fact, where we're focused on trying to find insights for the organization from what's happening in the public domain and bringing that back into and merging it with their internal data to better be able to make decisions. So that's another kind of angle of what makes Accrete differentiated, is that's what we're focused on. We're focused on that external, publicly available data, but that's very hard to collate, very hard to extract insights from, but ultimately can really move the needle for a variety of organizations in a variety of different domains, whether it be entertainment, whether it be government, whether it be finance. I mean, the use cases are sort of limitless. If anything, that's the problem, right, Bill, is that we have so many different paths, so many different ways that we can utilize this technology that we have to just really figure out which one do we want to focus on first, which one is going to get us to a profitable product line fastest and be able to leverage our existing technology. So that's been something that we're really focused on actually currently, so that we don't spread ourselves too thin.
So Andres, prior to joining Accrete, I was in Argentina and I worked in a gold mining operation there. And I spent all my time trying to drive innovation and technology into gold mining operations. And for anyone who doesn't know about gold mining, it is the least innovative industry in the world. I used to joke that the last time the gold miners innovated was when they traded in their mules for trucks 100 years ago. Customers were, in many cases, not interested in me coming to tell them how technology could make their jobs easier, how it could make them more efficient, because they like doing things the way they did them. So from your point of view, Andres, how is Accrete, how are we overcoming some of the lack of inertia that companies have to innovate, where companies like the idea of AI, but they're kind of scared, or I like what I'm doing right now and I really don't need your AI, or I'm not certain your AI is going to work. How do we approach customers? How do we overcome that kind of reticence on their part to adopt solutions?
Well, there's no question that AI is complex. It's complex to build, it's complex to understand, it's complex to know what exactly is going to be the benefit that it's going to drive for an organization. So we've taken a few different approaches. One has been some of the newer approaches that we've done, and in addition to just traditional sales, is to take a bit of a consulting approach where we'll look at an organization that wants to go down this path and sort of write up an entire AI roadmap for them, right? That shows all the different all the different parts of the organization where AI can fit in, slot in, what could be the likely range of lift that would create in terms of either cost savings or additional revenue. So that's one good way to really quantify and distill down precisely what it is that it can deliver. Now, the one that we're working on currently and really scaling this up is this idea of moving to a proof of value as quickly as possible, right? Showing to the customer, look what we can do in a really short period of time. We're talking here maybe weeks to a month at most, and hopefully we'll get that down to 1 to 2 weeks if things go the way we'd like them to for Zach and I. And so a customer can come to us with a general idea of where they might see value. We can go out, get data, give them some basic insights from a really small sliver of the total data set that we would ultimately go after and say, look at what we can do in this short period of time. Now, just imagine what we could do if you gave us 2 to 3 months worth of time. The proof is in the pudding, right? The proof is in the quality of the outputs, and the sooner you can get that in front of the customer, the sooner they'll have that aha moment and want to move forward to the next phase. So that's the way that we have to operate going forward in order to close deals at a faster clip, because otherwise the conversation can inevitably drag out a lot longer than we'd like it to. And so we want to produce tools internally that don't require the development team, that don't require the hardcore PhD team to be involved in that process, that any business or sales folks can just go in and produce outputs that have value rapidly and prove to the customer that we know what we're doing.
So let's go to Jason's question, kind of, and I know this is a topic you're really interested in, which is GameStop and how things kind of got out of control very quickly in the markets. I know you have kind of this project you're working on the side, kind of echoes that you're thinking about different ways to utilize technology. So just open-ended, give me your thoughts about kind of what the GameStop thing means. How does that affect us? How might we address gaps in the market that are evident because of GameStop?
Sure. So this GameStop moment is so fascinating on so many different levels. Certainly because of my background, it's certainly reinvigorated all of my former trading juices and has caused me to pay more attention to individual stocks than I have in a while. But the reality is we've actually been thinking about this problem since before this became a thing. And GameStop is a manifestation of it in the financial markets, but this is manifesting everywhere, right? It's manifesting in demonstrations. It's manifesting in artists, as you talked about earlier, that are becoming viral with just completely organically, and it's of course manifesting in stocks. So what we see here is an opportunity to create a product that is truly generic. It's not specific to stocks, but it can certainly be, a derivative version of it will certainly be focused on the markets, but it can be generic in terms of just allowing the end user, the end customer, to select from a menu, right, of different platforms they want to ingest data from. Call that Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We can even go to places like Discord, potentially Telegram. If the menu of inputs can be as long as the customers might need, right? So we create this menu of, and the customer can then select at a basic level, a very basic filtering mechanism. Let's say in the case of Reddit, it would be, I want to follow these 5 or 10 subreddits, right? So that gives you a more confined universe that you're going to be pulling data from versus the entire fire hose, which would be overwhelming. And then from that more constrained universe, you can then define an in-group and out-group, let's call them snippets, right, that you want to ingest. And that's where the modeling starts to come into play. So in the case of, I guess in the case of the Wall Street Bets subreddit, you might just want to ingest everything. but perhaps you want to focus it around a certain subset of ticker symbols in the case of stocks, right, that you're just interested in, or not, or the entire thing. So now you've got this raw data set that is pertinent to your use case. And this is exactly, by the way, what we've done with RumorHound. For any of you that have been on our site, you might have noticed RumorHound, one of our very early products. This is exactly how RumorHound works. It looks at Twitter, it looks at blogs, a bunch of just different public data sources, and then looks at at certain handles, right? So different Twitter handles that it has identified as producing information pertinent to the mergers and acquisitions space. But not everyone is producing that chatter all the time. So it has to learn what M&A chatter looks like by a domain expert giving it examples of, you know, M&A chatter and non-M&A chatter. And it's gotten pretty accurate over time, where now it's pretty much always picking chatter that actually pertains to M&A. And if anything, it's actually now subcategorizing that. So once we have that data, going back to the GameStop example, we can start to do really interesting analysis with it. And this is where I see the future of this product going, Social Echoes, that I think is so powerful. But it really makes the most sense, you know, just to break it down from a market standpoint, where we can look at all the chatter around all of the stocks that are being talked about across all of the platforms, not just Reddit, but Twitter and everything else together, and start to understand basic things like the sentiment, which is sort of table stakes. There are other tools that do that understand sentiment. But what they don't necessarily do as well, and where I think we can really differentiate, is to understand what share of the conversation does this stock have relative to all the other stocks? What is the cohesion of that conversation, right? So if a lot of folks are talking about GameStop, is the narrative concise and consistent, or is it dispersed across a lot of different types of narratives? So this has to do with topic categorization, something we do in our topic deltas product. We can, let's see, what else are the thinkings here? We can look at the, it just escaped my memory, so I apologize. But the point is that once you have all this data that is pertinent to a particular ecosystem, you can do much deeper levels of analysis on it. And the other one that's really important that you may have noticed in the case of GameStop is there's these profits, right? These individual accounts that everyone is sort of honed in on and focused in on. That's exactly what we see happening in the Vibe product, which is the Supernova product, I should say, that is the one for the music business, where there are particular individuals that have an undue effect. They have undue popularity or influence on their network. So by virtue of understanding who has historically had more influence on the network and what they're talking about, going back to Bill's point about having alpha, we can understand early on in the conversation which themes or memes now, as everybody's talking about, are likely to take off in the future. So the goal here is to have predictive value, not just to have analytical value of what's happening today. So by understanding who are the key players, what they've done historically, how popular they've been historically, and we can even measure individual commenters as to when they got bullish on a stock and how well their comments have performed, to measure them individually, merge all of those predictions together to get an accuracy weighted view as to how that aggregate prediction is likely to perform in the future. A lot of different ways this can be taken, but it all starts with collecting data from various platforms and allowing the user the flexibility to do this for not just stocks and markets, but brands, products, security reasons, whatever the topic that might be of interest could be. And you could expand this to go beyond just social media and also analyze news, from traditional sources to merge it with what's happening in the conversation on social media to have a better overall understanding of what's going on. So this is a big product, a big undertaking. We're taking it one step at a time, and we're just kind of at the starting point, but we already have all the tools at our disposal. All of our existing products essentially have the various components that we now need to put together to produce this tool.
Okay, so now I'm going to throw you a curve. So we're not going to talk about technology. You're in an audience of special operators, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Marine Raiders, guys who, have been jumping out of planes and swimming in cold water and fighting foreign wars. Something that doesn't really mesh with technology. But sure enough, in Elite, there's me and then there's Zach. So what's been your impression as, someone who doesn't have huge exposure to the military, who doesn't have exposure to the special operations world? what's kind of your thought of Zach and Bill in Accrete? Like, how does that make any kind of sense in the world that you come from?
So, my understanding of special forces and operators is that you have a whole menu of different skills that you're highly trained in that you have to bring to bear to achieve a desired objective, right? And I see us as a technology company, particularly an AI technology company, as having a similar situation where we have the capacity to go in 1,000 different directions. And if you left it up to guys like me and Prashant, we might just try to go in 1,000 different directions, right? So we need, I see folks like you, like Zach, as being the lens to help focus our creative juices that are flowing around the company and really hone in on what makes sense and understand what doesn't make sense as well.
I was on mute, but you had me laughing really hard about you guys going into 1,000 different directions, because you might, which is a good thing. Everyone brings different skills to the game, and certainly the technologists do things that I would never dream of being able to do. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Accrete's technology. Andres, what do you think about Accrete's culture? Kind of, how would you describe our culture as a company?
I think that, it's certainly a startup culture in that everyone has ownership of whatever they're in charge of, and they can choose to be in charge of, you have a lot of autonomy, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to choose what it is you want to have ownership over. But by that same token, you have to obviously perform to the same extent that you have that ownership. So I see it as a place that is very inviting to creativity, to risk taking, and really pushing the envelope of what's possible with technology today. And that very much meshes with my personality and what I look for in a company, which is why I love being here. I love the work we do. And I think it enables us to try to tackle hard problems that might not otherwise, you might not otherwise see solutions for quite a while. So I think we're trying to operate at the edge of what's possible technologically, and of course look to recruit the best people that can actually help deliver that, and look for people that can run with an idea and bring it to fruition, or to find out, maybe it wasn't the best idea at the time, but we'll learn something from it anyway that we can then later use. That's our philosophy. Is fail fast, move fast, break things, all that good stuff. Okay, but always with a positive attitude.
Okay, so a lot of discussion about Accrete being a startup. I just want to share some facts with people. Of startup companies in the United States, 95% of them fall short of their projection. 80% of them fail to see their projected return on investment. 40% of them liquidate and lose all of their investment. 99% of the reason for failure in startups is a lack of planning and experience. And if 100 startups begin in year 1, by year 15, only 17 of those startups are left. Those are all facts and figures from the Small Business Administration. So with that in mind, kind of the inherent risk of startups, Andres, you probably had a lot of different companies you could go to. Why not go to a big company that's established, that's safer, that has a big R&D budget that you can tap into, which has a large team of product developers and large marketing, kind of this machine that has products to take to market. Why would you a more established company?
So first and foremost, just personally, I'm a risk taker. I always have been. I always will be. So it sort of, that speaks to me. But more importantly, it's the flexibility and level of impact that you can have at a startup is just incomparable relative to a large organization. But I also had an unfair advantage, which was I've been working with this team for a lot longer than this company has existed. So I know their work ethic. I know Prashant. I know what he wants to accomplish, and that was a big reason for specifically choosing this particular startup, this particular team. But it really, it really has to do with what is the impact and the upside, whether that be monetary or just how much of an impact can you make on the world. And I think that bigger teams aren't necessarily always better, right? There's sort of a sweet spot where you don't want to be too small because then you don't have any resources, but too big can become cumbersome and lethargic. And so I think, particularly at the state we are now as a company, we're hitting that perfect stride where we have the right size team to remain nimble and creative, and still have the resources necessary to actually produce things that really move the needle.
All right, that's awesome. So I want to keep us within kind of time limits, and I don't want to blow the whole evening talking to Andres, even though we could. I do have a question that Ken Picard sent in. So Ken put it in the chat, and Andres, I don't know if you can see it or not, but Ken says, hey, I know we're talking about big corporations. How do you see AI playing into smaller organizations and or personal use? Kind of at the micro level, what do you see in the future of AI?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be accessible to everyone, and it'll start in the enterprise space and be more expensive and slowly work its way down. Anybody can technically access AI, just depends on your technical level of expertise. What is sometimes even harder to actually access is our data sets, in order to actually produce interesting outputs from it. But you see certain companies that are already trying to tackle this. There's some that are geared towards the tinkerer, if you will. I mean, I've seen AI, like easy to use AI that doesn't even require coding, where you can just take images and train it how to spot between different images, or sounds. Basic things, but it can lead to potentially proof of concepts for those folks that want to just, again, going back to that idea of proof of value. If they're trying to maybe raise money for an idea, it can be a crude way to build a basic understanding for an investor of what you're trying to accomplish. And for mid-sized enterprises, accordingly, there's similar tools out there. But of course, the most powerful ones are going to be, at least today, I think, reserved for the larger organizations, just due to the cost of the personnel required to build these things, and also the cost to gather the data and process it and such. But I think it will certainly work its way down. AI algorithms are only getting more efficient with time, as we're seeing coming out from the research community, and that just brings down the cost to train, to deploy, and the ease with which one can utilize them as well. So I think it's just going to continue to make its way and democratize itself. And we as a company, while we have been primarily focused on the enterprise side of things, we have taken a crack at a few retail products. In fact, this Social Echo is one that I've been talking about. We're discussing whether there's a retail version of it that might make sense. So even as a company like Accrete, we're not ignoring the smaller side of the market. We think there's tremendous opportunity there as well, and we'll certainly pursue it when it makes sense.
Awesome. So I have a whole list of questions. I can keep going, but what I want to do more than anything else is open up to questions from the audience. So here's your guys' chance to take a shot at Andres. Ask him anything, technology, company, future, whatever it is you're interested in. We'll do this for at least 10 minutes or so, unless we stop sooner, and then we'll go talk to Zach next. So open questions. What do you guys got?
Hey, Andres, it's Jonathan. Had a couple questions for you. So I was particularly interested in your Social Echo piece. So I had the opportunity to work with a lot of contractors in both the intelligence and the information operations space, and kind of what the fusion of both of those looks like for government work. Obviously, I can see commercial applications for those with some of those examples that you brought up earlier. But one of the things that we always ran into issues is, okay, well, you have all this data coming in, right? And whether you're putting it in queries or trying to customize it to get those data streams or flows that you're specifically looking at, it's really hard to gauge sentiment analysis or looking at, machine learning to do that, because that human aspect, like whether you're looking at, like, say you're looking at a riot about to happen, for example, or you're looking at chatter on, different social media or applications or, spaces like that. Looking at trend analysis, like do you guys dive into like the social network analysis piece of that? Like, how do you guys incorporate that, or do you incorporate it at all with some of the tech you guys are using currently?
So let me answer that in the way we're tackling it. Hopefully that answers your question. So one of the challenges, and we say this all the time to customers and internally, is that you can't boil the ocean, right? Like you can't just assume that you can train an AI to do like what we call topic discovery, for example. You have to define a problem as narrowly as practical to still produce value with that problem. And that's why I talked initially about the pre-filter aspect being so important. So in our Rumor Hound product, we're already pre-filtering the data that it's analyzing into rumor or non-rumor as sources that are generally geared towards finance. So we're not as likely to get, and of course we will, but we're going to be less likely to get information that's not pertinent to finance versus if we just say tried to ingest the entire Twitter fire hose or some random sampling of Twitter. So by that same virtue, you have to really define the data sources that are likely to produce the outputs that pertain to your use case. And then the way that we train both our topic categorization, which is part of this problem, and then the semantic and the sentiment engine is through a semantic understanding. And this gets into the technology weeds, which is not my expertise, but I understand it enough at a high level, I guess, to explain it, which is to say we're not trying to match keywords, but rather the meaning of phrases, of individual words, of the words around them, the context. An example of this is our normalization engine, right? So our normalization engine will take different terms, but that mean the same thing. We were recently looking at Donald Trump, right? So there's Donald Trump, there's President Trump, the president, and now the former president, right? Like, if you had a traditional system, you might need to train it on all those different things. But if it understands that the words surrounding former president are contextually the same as the ones that said president and Donald Trump before, it can normalize all that into the same key entity, which is Donald Trump. It can also separate out Donald Trump Jr., which could easily confuse the system. So taking a semantic, a meaning-based approach helps with categorizing entities, the relationship between them, categorizing topics, and also sentiment, because a word can mean two very different types of sentiment in two different contexts. Our CEO Prashant loves to use the phrase "Tesla is on fire." Right? Tesla is on fire if you're talking about a stock is extremely positive. Tesla is on fire if you're talking about a car is very negative. So how do you differentiate the two? You have to understand the context of what came before that phrase. That's what our systems attempt to do in order to separate out those ambiguities that can otherwise lead you down an inaccurate path.
Okay, Andres, I have one last one for you.
Sure.
We have all sorts of problems that we're trying to solve. We have all sorts of customers we're trying to impress with our cool technology. What are the problems that you think we should not try to solve? What are the things that Accrete.AI doesn't want to do? What are the customers we don't want?
I think it's going back to what I just said. It's the folks that maybe don't have a true understanding of what's realistic with AI, and they want to boil the ocean, right? The ones that want the technology to do something that it's either not well suited to do, or for us that are more also potentially on the separate side competitive in the marketplace, right? So if customers want to do just purely do structured data analysis, we can do it, but there's going to be more competition there, and that doesn't really play to our strengths, which is to look at unstructured data. So I think we focus on what we're good at and uniquely positioned to deliver on, and sort of ignore the other side of the market, because there's plenty of space here. This market's going to be growing for a very long time. I don't think we need to compete on every dimension. We'll just focus on what we're good at and integrate the other aspects where appropriate, but not focus on trying to go head to head with other companies that might be more focused in those arenas.
All right, that's awesome, Andres. So thank you for jumping in Prashant's seat today. I called Andres at about noon East Coast time and said, hey, guess what you're doing today? You can finish the rest of your evening and have a cocktail if you want, or take your kid, go pick your kids up, and I'm going to transfer over to Zach, who's sitting there patiently with his beard. in Rochester, New York. And Zach, I think Zach will have an interesting story for you guys because, you know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, he was you. So let's talk about Zach's story. So Zach, you talked a lot about kind of your background in industry in the past, you know, couple of years. Tell me about what you did in the military. And then after you've done that, then I want you to contrast that with what your current job responsibilities are, because I want to see if those two things align in any way.
Yeah, sure. So it's funny, some things contrast a lot and some things are exactly the same. Sorry, I'm just gonna switch my desk up. Yeah, so while I was in the teams, you know, I joined in 2009 after I dropped out of a computer science degree. I've been studying for 2 years computer science at a state school. Everything before that in my life was more successful, I guess, than a state school, you know, and I just didn't put the effort in or have the guidance or whatever you want to say to go choose, you know, the next big ambitious thing. So I went from like, you know, class president, played lacrosse 13 years, just crushed my high school. And then I was at a state school going, man, I learned all this stuff like 4 years ago, like with my friends, like, what am I doing? And so, you know, I dropped out and I joined the Navy because I thought the Navy SEALs looked like the toughest program that you could sign up for. I don't know if it's true. We can all argue about that on a, you know, over drinks another time, but I certainly learned a ton from it. And, you know, in the teams, I was enlisted. So I got to go to schools, right? I got to go be a sniper, free fall jump master, ended up as a master training specialist. And, you know, I got to do the combat deployment along with deploying up over the Arctic Circle. So really kind of a varied career as a SEAL. And I grew up in the teams. You know, I showed up, I couldn't drink legally, you know, and when I left, I was managing 70-person teams across extremely high risk training. And when I say teams, I had, you know, 10 different departments checking into me as an E6 because our E7 didn't check in for another 3 months and our E9 was pretty much on vacation for the past 2 years, right? And so I literally was, you know, in a different state from my command running high risk training and, you know, talking to a Commodore, you know, often both at the locations that we were training in, plus our own Commodore back in Hawaii. And, you know, that just taught me the level of impact you can have when you start to have teams working for you and just how much more like what you can accomplish, right? When you grind just as hard as you do as a you know, single specialized person, like in, you know, maybe becoming a better sniper, but then work just as hard to treat people well and to motivate people around you and to set the right goals and set the right objectives and then do the right debriefs. And you do that stuff over and over and it's just exponential. I remember in a piece of training that I did, and I was there with one of the guys on the Bin Laden raid. And, you know, he was like, dude, this is the most intense training I've ever seen. And it was just really a cool moment because the only way we got there, we had rounds flying over our heads inside the United States, right? We were moving, running and gunning in like 5 or 6 different units, all in a big old battlefield, you know, in California. And doing that at the level we were doing at, knowing that I was responsible for every single life out there, just showed like, man, this is what happens when you can actually set your mind to something and say, no, we're going to do it better than anybody's ever done it before. And it took, you know, 3 years to take the little program that I started with to turn it into that. You know, the civilian side, to be honest, is really similar, just with a different battlefield and different targets. But you still have to try to communicate things across different departments. You know, some that are really motivated to work with you, and some that are like, dude, I'm a supply guy to make sure those shelves are full of supplies, not to give them to you, right? Like we all have those stories, and like that's the reality of you have to learn how to, or one of the skills that transferred was influencing people that don't work for you, right? How do I influence somebody like a Commodore? How do I influence the person over in that other department to do it? I guess that wasn't the question though, Bill. The question was, how does it contrast? I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm working just as hard here at, you got to set your time to work out. You know, startups have a lot of really top tier players, so it's not like you're working with people who aren't also trying their best like we were in the teams.
So Zach, 10 years in the SEAL teams, E6, sniper, free fall jump master, you're running training all over the East Coast. You've made it as a SEAL. You could have done anything you wanted in the SEAL community. Why did you get out, and how did you end up in the technology world?
Yeah, so the decision to get out really did come down from that eureka moment for me, which was like the impact that I'm having is just so much bigger than myself. And, you know, my next command hopefully would have been a color, and I would have spent the next, you know, 7 or 8 years or longer specialized in a very, very specific skill set. And I just saw like there's a difference, right? On like the impact you can have. And I also looked at my peers who had, you know, 10, 12, 15 years ahead of me. And I thought, man, I'm in my prime right now. My story is right. The narrative is here. Let's transition this and turn this into a life of entrepreneurship and scale. It's hard to scale yourself in the military. Jumping into tech, it was pretty straightforward. So I explored, like many of you, consulting. I explored small business ownership and you know, just acquiring a business under 7 million and the different avenues there. But there's no question that I was most intrigued by people like Bill Gurley from Benchmark and Josh Koppelman and like just these incredible VCs and just how smart they were and how contrarian they were when they were talking about basic things, you know, like how a stock should IPO or whatever. You just saw these people, man, they see the future. And then then I went backwards in time and read all the books from the 90s, right? Like 4 Steps to Epiphany and you know, Crossing the Chasm and the stuff that like the professors that taught people like Eric Rice and oh, come on, Peter Thiel. And then, you know, that gave me the vocabulary I needed to build mentorship around me, and it took off. I mean, 1.5 years before I got out of the military, I was on calls with VCs, and I was flying to San Francisco and California and meeting people and doing startup weekends and things to make sure that I understood it. And then I just dove in. And once you dive into the startup scene, it's like, you know, people talk about sunk costs, like there's a sunk cost, you know, you shouldn't actually care because you can go do something else. But there's a level of expertise you can get coming from a military background and going into the startup world where you're used to working with people who are better than you, where, you know, like, don't get me wrong, I thought I was a pretty good SEAL, but there was a guy next to me that was just as good or better every step of the way. And when you can come into a place like Startup Landia, which is the crazy town of startup entrepreneurship, and you can come in humbly and say like, hey, these people around me are incredible. I don't know everything. Like, you'd be amazed how far you can go. And so I've learned, I think, in the last 2 years out in the field, I guess, like out 2 years, you know, as of the earlier this month, civilian side, plus a year and a half of mentorship calls before that. I feel like I've surpassed many of my peers in the startup world that have been at it for a decade.
So Zach, everybody knows SEALs renowned worldwide for world-class training, preparation. Even me as a Green Beret, I can say that. I worked with the teams a lot and was always impressed by the way they approached things. So with that in mind, what weren't you prepared for? What are the biggest surprises you've run you ready for that kind of threw you a loop? Even with all the preparation that you did, all the startup weekends, what curve got thrown at you?
You know, you're right. It's exact. You kind of hit it on the nail, right? You think you prepared for everything, and then in tech, you're surprised every day. So, you know, I joined a startup that I thought I'd vetted pretty good. You know, I'd been like, hey, I've talked to a lot of companies, I've talked to a lot of investors. I got introduced here. We've got the right early founders. You know, we know who the follow-on investors are going to be. Hell, along the way, I helped sell 1,000 robots, the largest toy manufacturer in the world, and I'm walking around with executives that, you know, 200-person conferences where every other company there has got 30,000 employees. And, you know, then we shut the company down 4 months later. And, you know, what I learned was my biggest surprise was the true level of rose-colored glasses that even I am not able to avoid. It's everywhere. And so being methodical and having due diligence doesn't mean that you can't steer the ship. It just means you have to be serious about which startup you want to join, why you want to join it, and what you're going to do to impact that. Because if you're at a company of less than, call it 50 people, from this background, you will have an impact on whether or not that company is still there in 3 years.
So you go to a company, it fails, you close the doors, you know, you're kind of looking around. We meet at an Elite Meet event. I actually had dinner with you out in Silicon Valley when I went out there for a business meeting. What made you end up being at Accrete? You know, kind of, you could have picked a lot of different places. How'd you choose Accrete?
Sure. So one thing was definitely the traction with current companies, right? When, you know, Accrete is only a few years old and is going, call it enterprise first. Sure, there's some commercial there. We might argue some of it's global, but really it's enterprise level company first. And there's not a lot of other startups that are doing that and seeing success. Often you start somewhere else and then work your way up to enterprise. Ed Kellnan at Seismic was somebody I've always looked up to in the space. And he did that with Seismic, where he started selling into, I think it was General Electric or General Motors. And he built his whole company doing that first, one deal at a time until they hit 100 million. And then they scaled it out a different way. I saw that opportunity here. You know, we've got some great sales, some really great customers. All those customers are growing with us. And so like that's kind of like it's a certain level of credibility coming from the outside in saying, hey, I can only do so much due diligence, right? These companies are running really, really fast. It's hard to get in and like be able to ask the right questions at the right time. Also sell yourself as a great team member to join, you know, because I'm not coming from a 20-year career as a CRO somewhere, right? So I think it was seeing those customers, and that was seeing the technology itself, right? So Andreas, I remember the first demo that you gave me, and just seeing where, you know, this company really is targeting AI problems, AI challenges, as opposed to like, you know, the last decade has been built on like big data and like the data science revolution. And we're just starting. It's just the beginning of an AI revolution. And we're right there. We're poised. You know, the GameStop thing happens, we get a call the next day from a top tier company to talk to us about solving that for them. Like we're in the right spot. And then the last thing, you know, is impact. I think Andreas said it as well, is I know that I'll have a huge level of impact here. I think I already have, and I will continue to. And that's because I joined, I believe, at a time where we're still young enough that we can do it right. We can build to scale. We can prep for scale. We can build a culture of excellence. You know, I'm building one set of the team, right? A piece of the revenue over in sales and marketing, but we can make sure that we have a culture of excellence, high expectations. We can run a tight ship there, and we can make it so nobody ever wants to leave this company. I've heard it from many people, and one of my best mentors who's told me, you know, your job as a sales leader is 3 things. And this could be for a CEO as well. It's recruit, retain, and revenue. And I knew that coming into a company like this, I'm going to get that opportunity, right? You come in with 1 or 2 people in a team and say, hey, my job is to drive revenue and recruit and retain the best talent that we can. And like, that was a fun challenge for me. So that's why I joined.
So I love this question, and I've been through this kind of process myself in the time that I've been out, and it's kind of adjusting to what you used to know or what you knew. You know, the military has a very established traditional structure. You know, it's a tradition-bound structure and culture, and everyone knows what it is. You know, officers do officers things, NCOs do NCO things. You know who the staff guys are, you know what the staff sections do and the directorates do. And it's, you know, you can move in from unit to unit, and it's pretty much the same, you know. Change the name of the ship, it's still a ship, and there's still the same divisions on it. Change the name of the Army division, it's still the same. But that structure, when you get into the commercial world, doesn't exist. You know, who knows what you're going to run into the different companies that you're in and how they function and how they structure and what their culture is. So tell me what that was like for you adapting to that after 10 years of the military kind of putting you into organizational charts. How do you adapt to places that maybe don't have an organizational chart and really don't want one?
Yeah, you know, fortunately, I had a really unique experience at the end of my career. My last tour out in Hawaii was extremely unique for my role, and I had to push the boundaries about as far as you can push them without getting, UCMJ put on you, as far as an E6, trying to get the job done for the platoons that were deploying out of Hawaii. And going into the first startup, so like the 3 startups that I've been in so far have all been completely different. Carbon Robotics, Rapid Robotics, and then Accrete. And that doesn't mean that most of the advice that I've received and that I continue to get from my, my corner of mentors and phone calls. By the way, if you haven't noticed that theme, everybody on here, I'm on a call about every single day. You know, I'm on constant calls. I'm in Revenue Collective. I'm in Operators Guild in San Francisco. I know that there's better people than me that have the answers. And so I'm talking to those people constantly. Anyways, most of that advice is generally how to ask the right questions. It's how to distill the right goals. And you can take that anywhere. And so like moving into this kind of more ambiguous environment, Carbon Robotics was probably the toughest because that was, hey, you're pretty much just the chief of staff to the CEO. Like we've got all these different priorities this company has to accomplish. We've got a full engineering team, this huge stack. We're building physical robotic arms, trying to deliver them to manufacturers. There's software testing and Q&A and reliability. And like, there's just all these different things. You can't do it all. And by the way, we need to raise $13 million. We have like 7 months to do it. And then add in that it's all qualitative. Like there's no playbook to how to do this stuff, which was, it was just really interesting. I think you just have to be ready to like not give up. The never quit thing is like part of the deal. Like, cause you're going to want to. There will be days where you're just like hitting your head on the wall being like, I see the answer so clearly. I don't know how to communicate it. I don't know how to impact the way that I need to. I don't, and that's just across the board when you're at startups. And then, you also have to take a step back and go, well, maybe you know the answer, or maybe you don't. And somebody else actually has something that we got to do first, and they might be right, and so on and so forth. But if you can do that and make sure that you're treating people well, like you'll flourish in a startup.
So the other thing I think is interesting is, we talk about going from a structured organization to a maybe much less structured organization. I think there's a parallel to that in the culture. In the military, when you're doing well, there's promotions, there's awards, there's assignments. We judge success very openly and clearly. We even build our identities around success. When Zach the SEAL or Bill the Green Beret walks into somewhere in uniform, everyone immediately knows who they form, and people see your awards and where you've been. That's kind of very clear, visible success that we can all kind of engender to who we are. So now that you don't have that, now that you're, wearing a Columbia or Patagonia fleece, how do you this success looks like for you?
I missed that part. Was that how do I design or define success for me now?
Yeah, how have you come to determine what success looks like for you?
Yeah, so I have 4 things on my wall over here actually that I use every day, which is, you know, financial stability, learn, earn my next role, and support my team. And so with those 4 things, you know, I define success with, you know, financial stability, meaning I'm accomplishing the goals I need to not lose my job, right? And make sure that I'm excelling and growing and in a way that's going to continue to, you know, build my financial stability, right? And then to learn is like probably what I spend the majority of my time working on, right? If every day I'm learning something and testing it and using it, you know, it's a success. That day was a success, and then you multiply that times 365 days, and again, this is why I think a military person can just run past so many of your peers in some of these places. Not all your peers. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of heavy hitters in the civilian side too. Most really in startups, but like you can keep that going and push and grind just like you did in training or anywhere else, like you'll find success. Earning my next role, so what that means is you know, growing my team, leading the next project, earning, like in the military, once you earn it, let's say once it's on your you trident's on the chest, it's like, well, you're going to get another billet. You know, you're going to get put over there. Now you do that thing. You have to do pretty bad to like have it go the other way. And you know, the funny part there is you could also do extremely well and get the same next billet, and that's just not the case in the civilian world. You earn your right to stay in the room. You earn your right to talk while you're in the room. You earn your right to take on the next project and to take on more responsibility. And ultimately, at most startups, you're going to be interacting with people like the CEO, and you're earning their trust every day. And it's hard because like some days, you know, you don't get the validation that you hoped for, you know, and it doesn't go exactly the way that you want. But if you continue to grind and constantly put the objective ahead of like maybe your opinion or like what you want to work or what you think is true, and you just continue to push, oh, it didn't work that way, I'm going to try explaining another way, I'm going to try something different, I'm going to bring a result, because we're like, I mean, I think Prashant's watching this, but you know, a couple of weeks ago we had a strategy call, and then like, you know, I had another strategy thing prepped, and a friend of mine in the company was like, brother, skip the strategy one this week, just bring the result, you know. And it's like, yeah, I needed that reminder, right? Because I could do strategy all day, because I'm used to planning like a SEAL does, and then going out on the op, and you know, you got to do both. And I don't know. I think I find success in one day at a time, to be honest, in the startup world.
So let's talk about the pandemic. So, you know, soft, small team, hands-on, face-to-face leadership. We're all struggling with change in the mix. So, you know, you came to Accrete, the pandemic's kind of in full rage. How has that kind of affected your leadership style, how you communicate, how you do your job? I mean, you're in Rochester, the main headquarters is in New York, I'm in DC, Andres is in California. Kind of talk through kind of how you've worked through that and how that has affected the way you do your job.
Yeah, that's a great topic. It's definitely something that's still happening, right? It's not over yet. And we're still growing, you know, my team, and I think as a company, to become more and more effective in the COVID world. The reality is I'm on the phone all day, every day. I would be anyways in sales. But the amount of calls I'm on is just astronomical. And then I look at other people's calendars and they're just as booked. So I think one thing that has evolved over time, I'm getting better at in the new year, I've definitely set better limits on is just cutting meetings, cutting them shorter, making them shorter, forcing them, leaving when you need to leave. It's very, very hard to leave a meeting when important people are talking and you're like, we've been here for an hour. Like, I need to do my next thing. I have a lot that needs to be accomplished. I would say the other piece to that is that, you know, the more responsibility that I take in this company, and the more, you know, some meetings you can't move, and some things are just going to continue to happen. And so I hate to say this to anybody who's looking to like take a break, but it just means I'm working at night again. You know, at Carbon, I worked at night a lot. At Rapid, I worked a little bit less. The beginning of this company, I was able to keep most of it during the day, but I'm back to pretty much knowing that so much of my daytime is going to be taken up with the right now, either a sales call or a sales team call or a leadership call or a strategy call or whatever. And we've got so many different irons in the fire to Accrete that we're pressing and testing and making decisions on. That just means I've pretty much shifted back with 3 kids to once they're in bed, I work a couple hours every day.
So it's time for unsolicited advice. What unsolicited advice do you have for the audience? As a guy who's been an Elite Meet member, who is a success story, we put you on the web, we have your picture out there. What's your unsolicited advice?
I gotta say it again that mentors are so important, and you in your position can talk to anybody in the world. I haven't actually tested that. I'm still waiting to talk to like George Bush Sr. or something sometime with a single cold email. But the level of people that you can get access to that want to help you and will take your call if you meet them where they are humble, ask good questions, prepare, follow up, like it'll change your life. Continue to do it. Use a CRM if you have to keep track of it. Also just using email and setting reminders and snooze and all those kind of, like using the features in the tools. I don't know, talk to people that are doing the job you think you want to do before you do it. Ask them what's miserable about it, because the miserable part's going to impact you, I think, a lot more, or at least it's impacted me a lot more than the most exciting parts. And so you got to enjoy the miserable part too. And fortunately at Accrete, it's all extremely exciting. So, even the hardest parts, it's, I'll step out and my wife would be like, calm down, stop talking, go write it on a whiteboard, because I'm trying to press in and lean in and continue to push to get to that outcome that I need to be able to press something further, and just keep the movement going. So I would just talk to people wherever you want to be.
So we have some questions written in that Megan sent me, and a lot of those questions were geared around towards kind of education. What kind of education does a guy need? What kind of college degree? What kind of certificates? So before you answer this, I just want to make sure everybody knows, I was intimately involved in the recruiting and hiring of Zach, and I never asked him whether he had a college degree, and I never found out that he didn't have one until after we hired him. So with that in mind, Zach, what's your thought on education, degrees, certificates, things like that?
Look, I think the reality is in technology, you have to actually know it if you're going to, like, if you're on this call as an AI scientist or a data scientist, and that's what you want to be and do, you have to go learn it. And however you learn that, I can say that when resumes, if you're going to network your way to a job, like talk to people who've done it, find people who you find online that don't have degrees, but have the job you want and in that technical field. But if you're going to go any traditional route on that with the technical role, just understand that like that resume is going to be screened by a machine before it ever sees an eye, right? Like you have to have keywords on there. You have to be able to do those things, and you just have to be creative and ready to play this other game. Plan your op. Like if you're going to go in and you learned everything on Udemy or edX, and then you went on GitHub and did a bunch of projects for other companies for free, and like you're earning your way there, you're going to earn your way into a job as well. It's just going to have to be earned, and it might not be on the timeline of you exiting the military. As far as non-technical stuff, I don't think it even touched my ability to get a role from the beginning. I got my role with Carbon Robotics because I was introduced from a VC who was invested in the company, who I spent 3 or 4 humble conversations with. And when I say humble, it's like you have to be really careful how you speak to these people and how you work with them. Not to coddle them, but you need to leave your best impression that they want to be your friend. Like they don't introduce anybody who calls them into companies. And I got that introduction, and then I got the interview because I'd already cased the place and I knew how to get there. I had to catch a plane in like an hour. I was like leaving, somewhere. I called Ryan Williams, who's on here, being like, brother, I don't know how to get on the whatever, BART to get to the airport. Can you be outside of this address when I'm done with this interview so you can walk me to my airplane? Like, I had this crazy thing. I got in there. None of that would have worked if I hadn't gone above and beyond all the way to that point. And then I got that interview with that CEO, and it also didn't work. At the end, there was like, what's the next step here? And so then I, got on the airplane flying back to Hawaii, spent 6 hours writing an email, and realized, well, this isn't really right. So then I spent the whole next day doing a case audit, more or less, of their company, of their industry, of everything they were doing. And then I said, hey, Rosanna, I sent her this email. I loved our conversation. I think you enjoyed it as well. I'm not sure I left a great impression on what I would do here day one. And then I just listed out like the start to finish, the 9 or 10 different operational pieces that I would audit the day I got there and what I would try to do to make it better. And she said, cool, write me 2 or 3 fake case studies to prove to me that you can write. And I wrote those and she gave me the job. So like, degree unneeded, right? Everything else lined up. I also learned how to tell my story on the way. I don't know, you have to be a storyteller. You have to learn how to translate for the person hiring you. It's not their responsibility, it's yours.
Okay, so you had me until you said that you learned to write, because I do not associate skills with writing. Yeah, you wrote something really well. She wanted to see how well you wrote. So I'm not sure I believe that SEALs are good writers, but maybe. So,
maybe, yeah, I don't know. That I don't know. Maybe it's because I spent so much time reading the 2 years on my way out of the military. But I will say that one thing that's gotten me pretty far, that is natural, I think. I don't know how well you train it, is my ability to mimic. It's the same reason I could do parody videos when I was in high school. It's been my ability in sales to I think to forward conversations, and it's the same way that I'm able to write something like a case study. It doesn't take long to go look at a bunch of other ones and being like, well, that one's really terrible and those 2 are pretty good. I'm going to write one like those 2.
So that's a good skill. So I'll pause for a second. Let's open up to any questions from the audience. For Zach or for me, I'm happy to take them.
Hey, Zach, I'll go ahead and ask you a question. Calling in from San Diego over at Warcom now, going to be separating later this year. But one of the things that I've been kind of wondering, and has come up a few times in some networking calls that I've had, has been, how have you had to adapt maybe some of your leadership methodologies to, people that you're managing or interacting with in the startup world? Are there any tools or insights or thoughts that you've ended up employing that have made you efficient in that regard, or more empathetic? Just curious.
Yeah, I think the only one that I've directly translated from the military is just to make a plan and dive it, right? Like if you're going to do one-on-ones with people, they should be planned one-on-ones that you do every week or whatever timeline you're going to have, and you should cover the same things, and they should know what they have to bring to the one, and I should know what I have to bring to the one-on-one. I do that every week with my BDRs, and we go down the same list of 7 things. It's written in our BDR playbook, so we know where it is. It's public. Everybody knows what goes to the one-on-one. That's something that you know, hopefully gives your team the comfort that they can say what they feel, because that's one of the things in the list, right? You do that. No, the first time you ever meet with them, they're not gonna like tell you you're a terrible boss, but maybe the 10th time they might be like, brother, you promised me this thing 4 times and I haven't seen it happen. And you know, hopefully that's criticism you can take. So I think just putting a plan together and like sticking to it is useful. You have to, again, meet people where they are. And that's both the people that work for you, the people you work for. And the civilian side, it's just, you know, I kind of feel like you can almost take a step back and be like, I'm just going to assume that I'm some kind of a leader from where I come from. Like I lead people in projects. So instead, I'm going to come in and just try to focus on the other things and try to kind of, again, mimic my environment of like, how do people talk? What's important to people? What do they share? What do they not share? Kind of like what's politically correct and what isn't. Like, you know, we're coming from a different world. And then your leadership is going to it's just going to naturally come out. Like when something needs to get done, it's not getting done. I remember this is a great anecdote. I remember sitting in a meeting. We just delivered a robot to like a really key customer. And this is like right in the middle of Series A. This has to go really well. We're raising capital. Like we're delivering this to the customer. Investors know we're delivering it when we're delivering it. And we got like 3 hours in and like problems are happening. And like the problems are, you know, 2 hours away with like one technician there. And then everybody else is still at our office in San Francisco. Things are just getting worse and getting crazy. None of this is my responsibility at all. I'm not even in the room, more or less, but I could just tell people are getting flustered, everything. I came in and talked to our CEO, and it wasn't like a half-hour conversation later that we had set phase lines for like what it was going to take to mitigate the rest of the risk, pull the project, get it back here. What was it going to take to make sure that we make it look the right way so we can be back on facility in the next few days, you know, that whole thing. And then it naturally pulled into the next thing. I got quiet again. I helped in that moment. We get it all back. And then the next day we're doing like this AAR off of some template that I pulled or something, right? And I let them talk for 2.5 hours. And at the end, I was like, can I just say a couple things? I know I'm new here, and it was like really basic stuff. Like, hey, is there any way that we all have to give a thumbs up before we deliver a product? Like, how many people in the room knew there was a concern before we got there? And it was like 9 out of 10 people are all like, yep, we knew it wasn't going to work. And you're like we need to deal with this. And like, it was quick. We put in a simple process to fix that in the future. And like, that was basic leadership. It was just owning scenarios and being like, well, we can't let this happen again. And in the moment, we have to deal with what we got, not what we wish we had. Let's go. And it's just going to be natural, I think.
Hey, Stuart, I'll add to that a little bit. So, you know, we're very used to in the military, kind of, in particular, if you're in a leadership or supervisory job, telling people things, you know, here's feedback for you on your job. And that's part of our role. And I have found that to take a more empathetic approach, where, you know, people that that aren't necessarily working for you, and everybody works for me, right? Because I'm the CEO. But I will approach people and say, hey, can I offer you some input on something? And ask first, like, hey, I noticed about, would you be interested in hearing my point of view? Instead of just assuming that I have agency to tell them something, because they might not want to hear it. So using kind of a more empathetic approach than what we're used to in the military tends to go a long way, because in the military, we all assume we're on the same team. In companies, maybe we don't assume that we're all on the same team. Maybe we're in competition for each other for getting the next promotion or something. So building teamwork through empathy allows you to kind of get that influence, get your insight in. And maybe when you share what it is you have to share, you'll find out that you only have half the story. And so it doesn't come across as you telling someone, here's what's wrong with you with the knife edge hand. And you kind of grow a little bit in the process. So that's something that I learned along the way that I thought was helpful. I don't know if that helps kind of answer.
No, it does. Thanks. Thanks for all the perspective and the stories. It's very helpful color.
Throw one more story on that one as well with empathetic leadership. I don't know if I learned this in the military or not. I actually think I really took it from Brent Beestor, who's another mentor of mine, owns 7 or 8 companies, and he was one of the first people I reached out to because he was a podcast guest, years ago when I was looking at my transition. And just his whole approach is about empathy and about treating people well, and what could they do if they're not doing, like, how much better could they be in your company if you help support them get there, as opposed to just firing them or giving them a bad day. And I took that approach with, I can't remember if it was at Carbon or the beginning of Rapid, where, one guy more or less, it was kind of known, like, didn't have a real role, wasn't a great, wasn't getting a lot done, wasn't very helpful. And it was kind of a bad time to get rid of him. And I was like, well, hey, why don't I just work with him? And, I had like 2 conversations with him, and it was just like, well, what do you want to be? Where do you want to take this? Like pick between these different things. Like, where can you bring the most value? That kind of thing. And it wasn't 3 weeks before he was every day showing up to me with a checklist of stuff that he was going to get done, and, asking me for more things to do and so on. And he crushed it, and I don't think anybody else in that company ever would have asked that. Would have been like, what's going to motivate you? How can we, like, where do you see yourself in 3 years? Like, those kind of things. Especially somebody, he didn't even really check into me.
Yeah, another quick question for you. So earlier during your story, you mentioned that about 1.5 years out, you were flying out to the West Coast and, meeting with these important execs, venture capital firms. How did you, find the time, or what was your schedule like during that, 1.5 years? I mean, it must have been just crazy.
Yeah, well, the good news was the job had gotten to the point where I'd made it, right? My military career had really made it where I was. It was pretty cyclical. And, that meant I didn't have to worry about much. I still worked just as hard, but when you take worry out, when you take anxiety out of your role, no matter where you are, you realize there's a lot more hours in the day, right? Because you're not trying to solve that problem mentally or dealing with that thing. And so I guess it started with just calls and doing it on my own time, listening to podcasts. So I was commuting every day on my motorcycle. So I was, listening to podcasts both ways. And it got to the point where I'd listen to podcasts while I was working out. Like I was listening to podcasts all the time, just learning everything I could in these different directions. And I started to identify people that I thought were really, really smart. One of them, fortunately, was a podcast host. His name's Patrick O'Shaughnessy. And so his podcast became like, I probably listened to 100 out of 100 episodes, back then. I think there's a couple hundred now. But you listen to smart people, and you read books. Sarah laughs. It's like, I've got all these books and I've read 50% of them. It's like, yeah, I read the really important part and then I skimmed the rest. I was like, okay, on to the next one. Because you get the general, like, so many of these books are really just about, they're not tactical, they're general. And so you get the general idea and then go test it, and you're going to learn more in real life than you will from the book. But I don't know. I guess all I can say there is find the time, right? Like you and by the way, it doesn't actually take that long to make a phone call or to send a LinkedIn message. I remember paying $79 for LinkedIn Premium so I could send one email to a guy that I couldn't find any other contact info. And that was Brent Beestor that I mentioned earlier. He's the one who convinced me not to get an MBA. I don't know. I think you just got to find it.
Right on. Appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, so I think we've got about 10 minutes before we are supposed to wrap up and we run out of time. I'll open up to any more questions you guys have, or even Megan, if you have one.
No, I don't specifically have questions. We can go through the ones that were submitted previously. Actually, I think some of the folks are on the call, actually. I know Matt Murphy had submitted a couple questions, and I saw he was on the call, as well as Mike Sims had submitted some questions.
Yeah, Bill, and my apologies for joining late. I just wasn't clear whether or not we wanted to go back into a technical piece versus what, I think Zach's bringing a lot of wisdom relative to the transition and the soft skills piece of his impact at where he's at. So yeah, he already answered the one in large part, the one transition related question I threw into the mix. But I think unless we want to go back into the technical piece, I'd probably pass the mic on to someone else that can take advantage of what Zach's talking to us about here.
I'll be happy to take a shot at a technical question. I'm not that technical, but I sell technology, so I can sell you on it. But go ahead, tell me what you want to know.
So one of the questions I came in with was, what's your team's vision on the human machine teaming? I don't know, I can think of it as divisional labor a lot of days, but
right.
I see I'm in a research and development technology company that supports some DARPA projects, and our project struggled, frankly, in terms of coming up with a sound design, the true project design level on what's the ML going to do, what are the humans going to do, and where are those two things going to touch. And I'm really curious for where your company's at and the products and services you're delivering. What do you see as the key ways of thinking about that design process? How do you talk to clients about that design process? And where do you see that evolving as the technology continues to change? And how data management's going to change as if.
Matt, you muted yourself a little bit. And Matt, you put yourself on mute by accident.
Man, I thought I just unmuted again. Sorry.
Yep, there you go.
But how do you see any of that changing as the technology changes?
Sure. So I love the question of kind of the human machine interface. So for us, that is a critical piece of what we're doing. We don't think that AI has value inherently on its own unless it's helping humans do something either better and faster than they did before, or helping them do something that they could not have done before. And so that's kind of our project in DoD right now. We are allowing them to find inferences in data and context in data that would have overwhelmed them. There's too much data for them to read from too many different sources to make connections to. So for us, it's all about what AI can do for a human, not what AI can do. And it's all about decision-making processes for us. So when we go see a customer, the first thing we start with is, how do you do things now? And could we help you do things? A great example, we're working with a company right now, of all things, that does grading and evaluating of collectibles, coins, baseball cards, things like that. So imagine how much time it takes for a human to look at a card, a Babe Ruth baseball card, and say, this card's authentic. Number one, it's not a forgery. And number two, we assess that it's a 90%, collectible, and that it's worth this much money. That takes a lot of human expertise, and that expertise doesn't scale very well. But with AI, you can build models that allow you to use computer vision and algorithms that then what one human was doing an hour, 50 cards an hour. So now your company's 10x efficient. So for us, it's all about what is the crux that the business or person is doing. What's their job? What's their function? What's important to them? And how can we make that better, faster, stronger, to use the Bionic Man version, or the way I looked at it when I was in the mining industry was, where can I increase production, decrease costs in mining, increase safety, and drive revenue. So that's kind of the way we look at the human machine interface. If it's not doing anything for the human, then who cares?
I'd say and the quickest way that I would say it is like, if anybody here has heard of robotic process automation, RPA. RPA goes in and, you know, they're targeting replacing the really simple, boring, repetitive jobs or actions that occur. AI is bringing superpowers to humans. Like we are finding operational efficiencies where they never could have been found. Decision-making capabilities that are more informed than they ever could have been. You know, customer experiences that are more personal and more at scale, and at scales that have never been even close to possible. And that goes from anywhere from like brand reputation, organizational agility, like whatever you're doing, like AI is a superpower if it's designed well to empower you, rather than just like replacing, I don't know, some other action.
Thanks for both those replies.
Matt, that's a great question. Mike, did you have one?
Which Mike?
I'm sorry, Mike Sims.
Yes, sorry, Mike Sims.
There's two. I was born in the 80s, so like everybody I know is named Mike. Yeah, actually I did, just from an educational entry point. Obviously, household, everybody and their mom is speaking about machine learning and artificial intelligence, and it's just something that goes by with passing with very little depth. And then academia is following suit by offering all these different programs, degrees or certificates in machine learning and data science. So my question is should somebody who's an aspirant to enter the technology sector, should they go get a data science degree at a top university, or should they focus on getting something more vocational, like a data science certificate coupled with a machine learning certificate coupled with a statistics certificate, and kind of do an a la carte thing that they can market to an employer out there and show that instead of doing this long route kind of traditional process that is expensive, they've done something much more focused. And that way they're coupling their entire career with something that's vocational, putting those two things together and becoming productive earlier on in their new career.
I'll take a first stab at it. You know, having been at, Carbon Robotics was Carbon.AI, and we didn't have a single piece of artificial intelligence in that company, right? Outside of a few PhDs that were developing some really cool R&D that we didn't get a chance to use. That company hired based on projects. It was like, what have you worked on? What are you like, don't get me wrong, most of those projects were in dissertations in a lot of ways, but I'll tell you the most impressive people and the people that got hired outside of their role, like we had one junior roboticist who didn't have any robotics degree. What she had was a bunch of projects she'd worked on, starting open source, working across the internet, and then working on, things in the weekends or whatever that she could put in a presentation and be like, hey, here's the robotics I've done. And by the way, grill me. Name one, here's a stack of 12 books that are the most recent from the best in this business. Ask me any question and she could answer it, right? And so the fact that she didn't have a degree and it didn't matter. But I'll tell you that most of the people that we interviewed across the board for different roles were coming from a pretty strong pedigree in that space. And then I just happened to, for this, have my brother he, instead of going and living a video game, he makes them. So he's my twin, and he went to Xbox Game Studios right out of college, and has been doing that. And now he's at Carnegie Mellon's online course for the business intelligence and something. It's like an MSBA or something. Like it's got an MS in there. And I'm telling you, the projects he's working on, like, are full on ML. Like, it's pretty cool. Mind you, they're interdisciplinary, but like they're working for corporations live in projects at the master's level. So he's getting projects on his resume that are going live at name brand companies we know using these techniques. And Carnegie Mellon's not a rough school for that stuff either, right? That's an online program. It's only 2 years, and he's doing it while he's working full time. So I think there's ways that you can find projects and ways to prove yourself. Phil, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I would just add, you know, at Accrete, we don't look for your degree on your resume. Even though we have some amazing PhDs, you know, our CTO, there holds like 75 patents at IBM. So there's lots of really smart, educated people in the company. It's all about kind of the role you think you want and what it is you want to do. So, you know, if you think you're going to be the guy writing algorithms, maybe you do need that computer science degree. You know, I think you just have to figure out what role you want. And like me, I don't know shit about computers. I can barely turn this one on, right? Like, I swear to God, when I went to college, we didn't have computers. Like, you paid someone to type up your paper on onion skin paper and hand it in, right? So what do I know about computers? So you got to figure out what is it that you know, and how can you apply that into the world that you're in. I'll give you a quick anecdote. So the first job I took, I did business development for a large IT hardware company, EMC Corporation. And when they hired me, what they said was, we have all the technologies we need. We know everything that there is to know about technology. What we don't know is customers. And there's particular customers in the national intelligence community that we don't understand. And we'd love for you to help us understand them. And we'd like you to help us build our business. And so I didn't know anything about business. But what I did was I took my background, and I had been a JSOC operations officer. And when we were hunting terrorists, we developed over years kind of you guys probably all know the acronym F3EA, find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze. So we developed that process. So I took that process and I said, okay, if I was hunting business and not terrorists, how would I do it? And if I was going to explain this to people who get squeamish about words like finish, what would I change those words to? And so I changed them to like identify, qualify, propose, close. And I built a business model to pursue business that looked just like JSOC's counter-terrorist pursuit model, but it was in more kind of business friendly words. And I applied that to the business world. So I guess the roundabout answer to your question is, I think you could do either. You could go to college and get a degree, or you could take the courses and certifications. It's all a function of where do you want to take those. And I think they take you to different places and different jobs. And I think you have to look a little bit more specifically about what those jobs would require. I think what we can do, if it's helpful to you, is I can have you talk to some more of our technical people and say, hey, within these roles, you know, what are you going to look for from me if for the open roles that might be available, if that's helpful. And I'll offer that to anybody on the call. If there's other people in our company that you want to talk to, we can help set that up.
Yeah, that'd be great. I appreciate those answers. I mean, it's interesting from being doing the transition, because I think we all kind of start at Indeed or Monster and we start clicking away at the internet until we figure it out, kind of breaking through the fog bank so we have some fidelity on land. And it's such a competitive market out there. If you look at the pandemic, where prior to the pandemic, economy was good, it was trending upwards, and for a long time, for about a decade, there's a lot of people that were comfortable, and it would take them a lot of risk to kind of remove yourself from that position and enter into a new industry, because it was, pretty much packed in there. And then the pandemic comes around, everybody's playing musical chairs. Different industries are, seeing exodus for various economic reasons. Other just in different ways. So when you're stacked up on the door, so to speak, with the resume in hand, there's 50 other people. So you're trying to look for a way to differentiate yourself. And veterans are nothing new in the private sector anymore. I mean, there's millions upon millions upon millions. It's not necessarily an attention grabber, nor is soft. I mean, there are people that are interested in it, but they're interested in hearing about your story for 5 minutes, and then they want to talk about what you can do. So that's kind of where what's leading me down the path of, okay, I'm 39 years old. I'm gonna, be functional at current brain power levels for maybe another 10 to 15 years. How marketable am I to a company that's going to take risk on me? So how do I de-risk myself improve myself so I can apply all the things that I've done in
Right.
life early on. And that's kind of why I'm looking at the degree path, because I would love to have the credential because it's a safeguard, it's an insurance policy, and it gives you the confidence to proceed forward because you're a known quantity in that industry, whether it's a MS this or an MBA that. But at the same time, it's shaving off 2 years that brain power time, and then you're becoming less marketable to a firm that has distance
Right.
from DoD or
Well-
IC. So, to try to close that 2 year gap, I look at different things, from the EDX standpoint, getting these vocational kind of, 1 year or half year intensive programs where you get a good learning vernacular, can throw a couple of keyboard strokes in Python, demonstrate something, and get through the gate at some of these companies. So that's generally where my, the genesis of my question.
I think it's a good question. I would give you this kind of feedback, though, and using my own model. If I can give you some feedback, what I would tell you is, in addition to honing your resume, spend as much or more time honing your network. I have had 7 jobs in 6 companies, and I've never once gotten a job through the front door by applying for an opening with my resume. Not once. Every single time I've been hired, I've been told that I was being hired and asked, could you please send your resume to HR so that they can do the HR thing, right? And so I think that that's a really important thing. Absolutely hone your resume. But if your approach is, I'm going to get the best resume and it's going to go through HR and that's how I'm going to get a job, you're never going to get a job. It's all about your network and who can see value in you and how you can show them value. And I'm sure you've done or you're starting to do informational interviews, and you should do those like crazy. And that's kind of what Zach talked about, is how he started talking to people in the industry. Just hit people up on LinkedIn or talk to the guys that that got out 3 years ago and say, hey, can I help me understand what you're doing? Help me understand what your job is. Help me understand what your day is like. And you ask them kind of pressing questions, and you start to get a feel for what challenges they have. And then you can propose, hey, would it be interesting to you to have somebody that could do this? Would you be interested in these skills? And then that kind of helps drive you down the road that you want to get to. So that's kind of the feedback that I would give you.
It's a great point. Great point. Thank you.
So Megan, we're run over time. We're happy to do this all night long if you want to.
I actually think that we covered most of the questions that were submitted in the earlier conversation, and we've recorded it as well, so we'll share it with the group. But I mean, I personally have learned a ton, and there's been some really great pieces of information, great quotes that I think we need to share with the rest of the membership. Thank you all so much for your time. Does anyone else have anything they want to add or any other questions? No?
Megan, I would just tell you that we're available, to anybody in Elite Meet that wants to reach out, email, text, phone call, whatever way I can help, I'm here. And whether that means talking about opportunities that may or may not be at Accrete, or whether that's talking about other opportunities that you're interested in, we're here to help. So take advantage of that as much as you can.
Great. And we very much appreciate the offer, and certainly appreciate your time tonight, Zach and Bill. And Andreas, I know had to pop off early, but we'll connect with him later. Great chat. I mean, I thought it was fantastic. I hope everyone else found it valuable as well.